Hey guys, so for today's video I have another live brush swatch video of the new Hipdot Ouija palette. So this is part of their games collection, I think it is. So there's also a Play-Doh palette and a Monopoly palette, but I really liked the look of this one, especially heading into October and Halloween, so I thought this would be really fun to pick this up this time of year. You can purchase all three palettes that I mentioned for $74 on the Hipdot website, or you can just purchase this one individually for $26. I believe you will get free domestic shipping if you spend over $50. This will ship to the US, UK, and Canada. And I also believe you can sign up for their emails and get 10% off if you haven't ordered from them before. And if you don't want to purchase from Hipdot directly, I think this will be coming to Ulta at some point, but I'm not sure exactly when that will be. So I ordered this on September 11th, which I think is the day that it launched, and it arrived on September 16th, so really not too bad at all, especially considering I think they're based on the West Coast and I live on the East Coast. So it had to make its way all the way across the country. So while we're talking about shipping, I'll just quickly tell you how it was shipped. So it came in this like bubble mailer. Obviously my address is on the other side. And then it was wrapped in kind of one loose piece of bubble wrap, and then it had like this little sleeve around it. I did order some additional palettes to kind of get up to the free shipping. So I purchased the Mystic Mauves palette, which I think came out last year. I'll just quickly show this to you. So that looked like a very kind of pretty neutral palette. Of course, I want to use it, but I don't really want to mess up the embossing, so we'll have to cross that bridge on another day. And then I also purchased this Witchy Worms palette. I really love this kind of gold foil embossing on it. And that is what that palette looks like, just in case you were wondering. And then finally, I got these little Peeps pins. They didn't come in any kind of really impressive packaging or anything. They have this like plasticky little bag here, and then they're like in little individual bags. So this was the one I was most excited about. It says Makeup Chick on it. So you may have seen my kind of April Fool's video that I did using their Peeps sponges that they came out with and comparing it to an actual Peeps. So I'll link that for you if you are curious. But anyway, I just thought these were kind of cute. They're not like super high quality, I wouldn't say. They don't have like a real kind of enameled look to them. So I don't know. I forget how much these were. I think they were on sale, but I wouldn't say there's something you have to rush out and buy or anything. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about this palette. So like I said, this retails for $26, and this is the outer packaging here. So they call it a pressed pigment palette, which I'm sure means that some shades are not intended, quote unquote, for the immediate eye area. On the back here it says, call on your ancestors and ask them how wicked you look. The Hipdot, and it has a small little like Ouija emoji, I guess. The Hipdot Ouija palette features cool and warm tones in buttery mattes, satins, shimmers, and glitters. Net weight of 22.5 grams or 0.8 ounces. As you can tell, there are 15 shades here. It has the PETA, vegan, and animal test-free logos here. 12-month shelf life, and it is made in China. So that is the back. I don't know if you'd be able to read those ingredients even zoomed in, but it does have the ingredients on the website if you want to take a closer look at those. So one thing I like about their packaging is that it's just a sleeve. So it's a lot easier to kind of keep the outer packaging when they do that. It's just, I don't know, a little bit sleeker. So as you can see, the sleeve kind of mirrors that side, and then this side, it just has this kind of language here. It doesn't have the shades or the ingredients for whatever reason, but still kind of nice finishing there on the back of the palette. All right, let's take a look inside. So it does have a mirror, and let's see my camera. So it has the sun and the moon up here, and then two people, I guess it's the reverse image, playing the Ouija board. And then we have a little plastic, and those are the shades. So I do like that they have the shade names on here, and it looks like there are 3 6 mattes, and then everything else looks like it's either a satin, shimmer, or glitter. So I'll give you the shade description on the website for each shade as I swatch it. And speaking of swatches, if you've seen any of my previous brush swatch videos, this won't come as any surprise, but I like to use the Rephr number 21 brush for all the metallics. And I don't know if it explicitly says that you can use these wet or dry. So we'll see how things go. I might end up using some of this Tarte Maracuja Mist to wet the brush. And then I'll use the Rephr number 2 brush for the matte shades. So this is kind of a MAC 239 dupe, and this is a MAC like 242 dupe, basically. Although I think the new MAC 242 is just synthetic, and this is a blend of synthetic and natural hair. This is all natural hair, I think. So I'll be using these brushes, and then I started doing this last video, and I kind of liked how it worked. This is a little sample of a Sigma tool that you could use to clean your brushes. It was like an actual glove that you could put your hand into, but they've come out with something kind of similar to this in theory anyway, called the Sigma Switch. So I'll use this to knock off shadow in between swatches. I used to use the Vermona Color Switch, but I think this might be a little bit gentler on brushes. And then finally I have the Lorac Behind the Scenes Eye Primer. I like to use a primer on my arm when I'm swatching because I also use a primer on my eyelids. So I feel like it gives you the best approximation of how your shadows will actually look. And while I was scrolling through the page on the website, it does indeed say which shadows are not intended for the eye area. Those shades are Spirits Summon, which is interesting because usually it's the red shades that are kind of marketed as not for the eye area because of the pigments that are used in lieu of carmine, which is a non-vegan ingredient. Okay, so Spirits Summon Bored, that might have some red pigment in it. Let's see, Bored, Mysterious, and Medium, which is that bright kind of blue. So just be aware if you have any concerns about staining or irritation or anything like that. All right, so after I apply the primer, I'm just going to give it, I don't know, 30 seconds to try and set there. Okay, so the first shade here is called Goodbye, and they describe this as the Blackest Black Matte. And it looks like there's a tiny little shimmer particle that made its way into this shade here. So this is Goodbye. And of course I'm using my brush, my nice clean white brush on the black shade to begin with, but that's life. Okay. So it doesn't feel super creamy, but I think that applies pretty well with a brush. So if you enjoy using black shadow, you might like that one. It was interesting to me how they kind of set up this palette. So we have a lot of like cool tones, this little kind of area there. So 6 are kind of cool toned, and then the other 9 are kind of more warm, jewel tones. We have those greens. When I first saw the palette, I was not quite sure what to make of it, but I think grouping it that way kind of just helps my eye anyway, kind of understand what's going on here. And you know, this answer shade, we'll see when we swatch that one, but that one, you know, it looks like it's almost a kind of mix of this shade, this Planchette, and the warm side of it, and then kind of more silvery. So that'll be an interesting shade. Okay, so let's go in next to medium. This is a dark periwinkle purple. I guess that's periwinkle. I think of periwinkle as being a kind of lighter color, but I'll go with it. And of course, with darker shades like this, it's usually a good idea to do your eyes first in case you have any fallout. So not terrible. I think, you know, I was able to get pretty good opacity on that. It's looking a tad bluer to me on the viewfinder here than it does in person. In person, I can see a little bit more of that purple coming through. So I always try to, you know, do the white balance and make things as kind of color accurate as possible, but to the extent I do see any differences, I will let you know. Okay, so the next shade is Seance, and this is a reddish copper shimmer. So that feels very nice and smooth. Nice opacity. Okay, and then switching to my number 21 brush. You can see it does kind of get a little crumbly there in the pan. And as I've said before, if you don't like using your fingers and you want kind of the best payoff and application, it's usually helpful to, it can be helpful to pick up a pack of those like sponge tip applicators. I think those mimic a finger the most. But even with a brush, and that's a dry brush, I think you get a pretty similar result there. So I think I'm gonna hold off on wetting the brush, and I'm just gonna take this little Zoeva brush and just kind of brush away some of the fallout so I don't get it into the next shade. Okay, so next up we have the shade Starlight, which is definitely kind of my kind of shade. It's a little bit, has a little bit more gold in it than I was expecting. I was expecting it to be just a little bit more on the silvery side. It's still pretty, but maybe when we get into like Summon and some of these other shades, we can kind of compare. So my aim here is to do kind of one row at a time. So again, I think you get pretty good payoff with a dry brush here. Maybe not quite as intense, but still I think you don't have to use a finger if you don't want to. And did I mention what Starlight is called? So Starlight is Nude Ochre with silver sparkle. So I guess in the pan, maybe I'm seeing more of those silver sparkles come through, but I think calling it a nude ochre definitely implies a warmer shade. And if I didn't say, the Seance shade is a reddish copper shimmer. I don't know if I see kind of a big difference in the overall kind of texture of those two shades, but anyway, that is what they call it. And finally on this row we have Are You There, which is a really fun green shade. Nice olivey color. I bet some people are going to do some really amazing colorful looks with this palette. And they say that this is an olive green with gold sparkle. Oop, a little bit of fallout there. Yeah, using a brush, I mean, you will probably get some fallout. So again, if you're doing a super dramatic eye, you might want to do your eyes first. All right, so I think out of the three, I think least impressed with that dry brush. It's still a pretty color, but I think I'm going to load up the brush and spray that. And yeah, I think foiling that one is definitely giving you a better kind of color intensity. So that one, you can see it's a little bit more kind of brown undertone. You get more of that kind of vibrant green with that one. All right, so while I am doing some wet brush swatches, I'll go ahead and do the same for Starlight. Yeah, so they don't say anything about kind of using a wet brush, but if you like a super foiled look, I would definitely recommend trying it. I think I can maybe fit that last shade on my wrist there. So it's interesting to me because I think foiling these shades gives you an even different kind of intensity and payoff compared to the finger swatches. So starting off, this is Goodbye Finger, Goodbye Brush, Medium Finger, Medium Brush, Seance Finger, Seance Dry Brush, and then Seance Wet Brush. And then we have Starlight Finger, Starlight Dry Brush, and then Starlight Wet Brush. And then we have Are You There Finger, Are You There Dry Brush, and Are You There Wet Brush. So that's one last look at row one before I remove those swatches. Okay, so I've reprimed my arm and let it set. So going into the next row here, we have Paranormal, which they call a silver with sparkle. That is Paranormal. Going to try to start a little bit farther up my arm. If you watch Teresa is Dead, she was talking about being on the quest for silver recently, which means basically trying to find her ideal version of a silver shadow. And I wonder if she has seen this palette. I'm sure she has. She does a like a drunk makeup bingo on her channel where somehow she takes images from Trend Mood or wherever, and they pop up randomly, and then if those if that particular type of category is on her bingo card, then obviously she can tick it off. So it's a very fun concept for a video. So I just wet this brush, and I think I just did this a little bit backwards to how I did the other wet swatches. So one way to do it is to kind of load up your brush and then spray it, or go in with a wet brush. I think loading up your brush first is probably best for kind of the long-term health of your eyeshadows. So that is Paranormal Finger, Paranormal Dry Brush, and Paranormal Wet Brush. This one, I wouldn't call it patchy, but it just seems a little kind of inconsistent. So I think with a shade like that, it's not kind of as big a deal because you're probably layering it over something else, and it's light enough that you're kind of going more for the shine and the metallicness of it rather than the actual underlying shade. Okay, so let's go into Lunar, and this is a black pressed glitter. Okay, so this feels kind of soft. Like it's almost like fine sand as I'm pressing into it, which is interesting. Okay, so this is, yeah, I'm sure a lot of people won't kind of love that. Hopefully you can kind of see the texture. I'm not sure I really understand the point of like a black glitter, because with a dark shade like that, you're not getting much kind of reflection, which is usually what you are kind of going for. Let's see how the brush does. That kind of looks like a mess. It kind of looks like that, what is it called? That game that you play where you have like the little magnet and the fragments of metal or whatever that you can kind of drag around. So I don't know if my brush was still a little damp, but it's really kind of globbing on. It's not sort of super easy to manipulate. All right, let's try. All right, so I wet the brush, and I think that is that is just kind of a mess, really. So far this is my kind of least favorite. I mean, they could have taken a black, like a matte black, and either put like micro sparkle in it or something like that, but I'm not quite sure how you would use that shade. I don't know if you can kind of see the pan. I mean, it kind of looks like there's a dip in there now. All right, so zoomed back out for the next shade. I just wanted you to get a good look at that texture. All right, so the next shade is Answers, which is a pretty duochrome. This is a nude green shift shimmer, is what they call it. And you can see the underlying color looks a lot warmer than it looks in the pan. I don't think a dry brush is, well, you can kind of build it up. Hopefully you can see that shift. And then we'll do a wet swatch. So I don't think there's a huge difference here. I mean, the wet brush was a little bit easier than the dry brush, but I think all three of those are fairly similar. I think the finger, you just have a little bit more kind of depth to it. Okay, so going in next to Planchette. It feels nice and smooth. This is like a nice kind of transition color on me anyway. So they call this a mauve matte. So nothing kind of revolutionary about this shade, but it's a good kind of grounding shade to have in a palette. And it's not super dry, it has almost a little bit of a sheen to it, so I think that helps kind of things blend out. So the last shade in this row is called Spirits, and this is a bright sunset shimmer. Just an interesting way to describe a color. Very, very vibrant. It's almost a little neon. Wow. So that's hopefully picking up on camera just how kind of bright that is. So going in with a dry brush. And as I was watching this, I'm remembering, if you recall, the Anastasia Subculture palette, which I'm not saying this palette is like that palette in quality or color story or anything like that. I never even had that palette. But just in terms of it being a pressed pigment palette, typically with eyeshadows, there are the kind of like binder and filler ingredients. So just in terms of how the shades are kicking up or if there's any fallout, I just want to remind you that they are advertising it as a pressed pigment palette, and that's partly, I think, due to some of these shades not being eye safe, but also you should just be aware of that when you are applying them. Okay, so let's talk about this row. So this is Paranormal, Finger, Dry Brush, Wet Brush. This is Lunar, this is that pressed glitter shade. This is Finger, Dry Brush, Wet Brush. This is Answers. This is Finger, Dry Brush, Wet Brush. Planchette, this is Finger and Brush. And then finally, Spirits, we have Finger, Dry Brush, and Wet Brush. So one more look at that row. And just to show you as I'm trying to remove that glitter. Looks like I'm cleaning out a chimney or something. I would say so far the second row had kind of the most, I guess, disappointing shades with that pressed glitter, and also one of the most impressive shades with that kind of neon like peach. I also really liked Are You There in the first row, and I think, you know, so far the mattes have performed pretty well. Okay, so for the last row, again, I've reapplied the primer. I think I'm gonna have some black glitter specks kind of lingering, but what can you do, right? I might have to take a shower after this. All right, so going into Summon, and this is a Ivory shimmer. That'll probably be a nice kind of inner corner highlight shade. Going in with the dry brush. And I think maybe because it's a shimmer, it does seem a little thinner than some of the other kind of more metallic-y, foily shades. So we'll see if a wet brush does anything. I mean, I think it builds up the intensity a little bit more than a dry brush, but still, it's not like a super like foily, metallic-y type shade. Okay, so going in next to Hello, which they call a white matte. So you have both a white and a black matte in this palette. So pretty good for a white matte, not too chalky. And all right, no complaints there. Okay, so next up we have Bored, which is a brick red matte. So that is Bored. So next up we have Mysterious, which they call a mustard orange matte. I don't know if I see a lot of mustard in this. More like a tangerine kind of shade. You could go full on Halloween if you wanted with the, the orange and the black. So I think you can definitely kind of pack on this shade and kind of build it up. And then finally we have the shade Whispers, which they call a vintage green pressed glitter. I'm a little nervous about this. Again, has that same kind of almost like fine sand type texture. I think if you are going to do a glitter though, let's zoom you guys in. I think if you are going to do a glitter, this is the shade to do it instead of that black, because I just don't think you get, you know, the kind of result that makes working with a glitter worth it, in my opinion. All right, so let's try and go in with a dry brush. I mean, you probably want to use glitter glue. It's interesting because again, I think this brush is kind of packing it on a little bit better than the finger even. I don't know if I'm able to kind of like scoop up more. All right, so let's try. All right, so trying that glitter with some of the Maracuja Miracle Mist. Yeah, I don't know if that really does a whole lot. You really get some nice shine out of that shade though. Okay, so that is one final look at this row. Again, we have Summon, Finger, Summon, Dry, Summon, Wet, Hello, Finger, Hello, Brush, Bored, Finger, Bored, Brush, Mysterious, Finger, Mysterious, Brush, and then we have Whispers, Finger, Dry Brush, and Wet Brush. Okay, so one final look at row 3. Okay, and then I will zoom in on the aftermath of swatching. So again, I think all the mattes performed pretty well. So that's nice. So as far as standout shades, I think the glitters, and again, you can see kind of trying to remove that shade. The black glitter, I think, is just not worth dealing with. I think they could have replaced that shade with something a little bit more impactful that would have made working with the glitter worth it. I mean, you already have a matte black in this palette, so I'm not sure what a kind of black on black glitter really gets you. Spirits I thought was a fantastic shade. I liked Are You There? Seance and Starlight for me were just kind of middle of the road because, I mean, they were nice, but you probably have pretty similar shades in different palettes. They're just kind of your average kind of metallic neutral shade. Answers is a nice duochrome if you enjoy using that type of shade, but I don't think it's a very unique duochrome, so you might have something pretty similar. And then Paranormal and Summon were kind of just okay for me. I think Paranormal underperformed Seance and Starlight, and Summon, again, I think, is it the only shimmer? No, Seance is also called a shimmer. So that one, it just wasn't as kind of impactful, but it would be good for highlighting the inner corner, or I guess the brow bone if you like that, just to add a little bit of brightness in those areas. So again, I think the color collection kind of confused me a little bit when I first saw it, but I think you do have a nice mix of warm and cool tones in this palette, and a nice range of depths. I mean, you're going from straight white to straight blacks. So I think there are definitely some interesting looks that you could come up with, and hopefully this video kind of gave you some ideas for the best ways of applying different shades and the colors and everything when they're actually applied instead of what they look like in the pan. But yeah, I think that's gonna do it, guys. So please let me know if you picked up this palette or if you plan to. But either way, I hope you will subscribe if you enjoyed this type of video. Let me know if there are any other palettes that you would like to see swatched this way. And until next time, I hope you're all staying very safe and healthy, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.